See you then, Lee. Thanks very much. Well, let's bring in our panel this afternoon. Joining us as they do each Monday, our political strategist Grahame Morris from Barton Deakin here with me in Canberra, and in the Sky News Centre, Bruce Hawker from Campaigns and Communications, a former Federal Labor strategist. Welcome to you both. Let's just start on the education issue in particular. Bruce, this is a pretty big ticket item as far as Julia Gillard's concerned. Is there a risk here that this could turn into, or go from being something that was meant to be delivered in this term to something that's going to be promised for the next term?
Well, I think it'd be a lot easier if there was a clear dollar amount attached to the next year or so, David. I think there's going to be $1 billion given over to the reading program, and I think that's very important. But I think they've just got to sit down with the states now and work out the funding arrangements, and hopefully, goodwill will prevail, and we'll see a much improved Gonski inspired education system across the country.
But the problem here is it's being dragged out over a number of years now, and even then there's a big question as to whether the key states, Victoria, Western Australia, Queensland, are going to back it.
Well, it's a very expensive program. If you want to be a seriously competitive nation when it comes to education standards, and all the indications are that we've slipped in recent years, then we do have to put a lot of money into it. And of course, that's a challenge for the government at any time, but particularly right now when they're trying to get a balanced budget in the coming year. So I think that it will get there, and I think that this will be a net positive for the government. But I think it'd be nice if they could put some more dollar figures around it so that people would have a bit more certainty about it, and it wouldn't lend itself to these attacks from the Conservatives, particularly Conservative premiers, who I don't think really want to see this scheme succeed, because it goes to the heart of what Labor's on about, making sure that education standards are as high as they possibly can be across all areas.
So you think that they're putting politics first here rather than the actual policy debate?
Well, I think there's a bit of that, to be honest. I mean, we saw Ted Baillieu strip about $500 million out of education and then put $400 million back in and say he was doing the right thing. So I do think we're going to see a fair bit of this sort of argy-bargy. I don't think they're going to be going out of their way to do any favours for the federal Labor government, and I think it's a shame if education standards are going to suffer as a result of that. We really have to be very competitive in this area in the 21st century with the with the explosion of growth and wealth in Asia. One of our big advantages is a comparatively good education system.
Grahame, where do you see this heading? Clearly there's public support for spending more money on education, and indeed for the sort of reforms that Gonski's recommended. Is it still going to be a political asset for the Gillard government?
No, I don't think so. Certainly not the way it started. And we still have the non-government schools all concerned about where they fit in this, because they think that they're going backwards under all of this. But the states are quite entitled to ask a few questions, as they are. They look after education, and they are saying, look, what do you want to the federal government? What do you want to do? Well, we want to do bits of government, bits of Gonski. Which bits? Well, some bits. When do you want to do it? Oh, so over time. How much is it going to cost? Not sure. Where's the money going to come from? Well, it'll be there eventually. If I were the states, and particularly in this sort of political climate, I'd be saying, look, you come to us with a half-decent proposal and we'll look at it properly, but we're still a bit uncertain because come September, you mightn't be there. So we want to have a look at what the other mob, the opposition, are doing too. We will compare notes and see what's best for our state. And any sensible Premier or Treasurer is going to be doing that at this stage, particularly as the federal government, the Labor offer is so fluffy.
Let's move on to the media issue. The Greens obviously trying to push the government into some action on this. Do you think, Grahame, the government would be wise to pursue media reform, take on some powerful vested interests this side of an election?
Well, if it was sensible media reform, yes, but not the path they're going down. you know, I actually think we ought to open it up and have one more TV station. Let's have some real competition instead of the protected little troika that we've got at the moment. What do you do about the ABC, which is by far the most powerful media voice in this country? Why shouldn't News Limited, which is sort of the biggest newspaper company in the world and the biggest TV company pretty well in the world, why shouldn't it be allowed to have a TV network in its own country? You know, it has your organisation or parts of your organisation, well, David.
Yeah, but B-Sky B owns a third of us, which is just to clarify.
That's right, in a roundabout way, but not a commercial network. And look, I am an ex-News Limited boy, and I was a director when Lachlan Murdoch ran News Limited. He'd be fantastic if he could actually properly own or run a TV network.
I don't think it's certainly the government's consideration to give News Limited another free-to-air licence.
They're going the other way, which is make it harder for News Limited. You know, the media has enough problems at the moment surviving without this government sort of cutting the throats of people who love the media.
Bruce, how do you see this issue?
Look, I think it would be unwise to go into a full-on war with the media, not just News Limited, but media generally in the lead up to an election. I think that's unwise. And I suspect that there will be heads inside the government who are saying that as well. Let's just cool it a little bit here. And I think we've got to be very conscious of the fact that, you know, the media is sort of doing it pretty tough at the moment. You know, we're seeing Sydney Morning Herald going down to a tabloid-style operation. There's real questions as to whether it will be in print form by this time next year, except perhaps on the Saturdays. So, you know, we're seeing this real shrinking of all elements in the media at the moment, and I think that's a real challenge for, you know, for the political and other discourse that occurs in this country. So I'd be a bit cautious about saying, well, let's have another TV station, as Grahame was suggesting. I think part of the problem is that there just isn't enough revenue to go around the free-to-airs at the moment to make them, you know, productive and really profitable operations. So I think we should be very careful about it. That'd be my view about it. I just don't think that going into an election campaign is the time to be going to war with Rupert Murdoch or anybody else, any more so than they probably are at war with him now. So, and I do, you know, take that point that there's already a pretty strained relationship, I suspect, between News Limited and the government. But the idea of a, you know, another, you know, a News Limited network, if Graham's talking about that, I think would be anathema to a lot of people, given that whole Fox and Friends sort of mentality that exists in the United States. I don't think it's good. I don't think it's healthy.
All right. Well, look, we need to move on, talk a bit about polls. Tomorrow we've got a very important news poll that everyone will be looking at. But before we get to that, I just want to bring you up to date with the latest Essential poll, which has come out this afternoon. Peter Lewis from Essential Media Communications is with us to have a look at it. Peter, you've got Labor dropping back a point once again.
That's right, David. Labor down 1 to 34, Coalition up 2 to 49. That has us at the two-party preferred of 56-44, which I think was where News Poll was a fortnight ago.
And historically, I mean, the Essential poll doesn't bounce around as much as the others, but I'm just looking back. You haven't had this sort of gap, the 56-44 gap, for quite a while. Well,
it's definitely the worst result for Labor since the beginning of this year. This number was one of those that we had towards the end of last year. Often because we do the rolling two-week average, changes take a little while to wash through as well. So what we're seeing here is the culmination of the past fortnight.
So more bad news for Labor there. You've also asked whether the government deserves to be re-elected. Explain to us how this is a different question to who you'd vote for and what you've found there.
Well, we've asked the question, as of now, do you think the current federal Labor government of Julie Gillard deserves to be re-elected? The response here is interesting. 26% deserves to be re-elected, a little bit under the primary vote. 57% does not deserve to be re-elected, and that's obviously larger than the coalition primary vote, with 17% not knowing. 2/3 of Labor voters say deserve to be re-elected. Unsurprisingly, just 4% of coalition voters say the same.
And you've also asked whether people think the Liberal Party, led by Tony Abbott, is ready to govern.
Yeah, and on this issue, again, not great news for the Liberal Party. 36% believe they are ready, 45% not ready, 19% don't know. Again, obviously a big shift between the parties, but I guess the takeout from this is you can see why both sides are going to continue to be running fairly negative propositions in the lead up to the election.
Yeah, Peter Lewis, thanks very much. We'll catch up next week. Let's go back to Bruce Hawker and Grahame Morris. Bruce, those sort of numbers, the gap there now at 12 points after preferences between the two parties. What do you make of that, and how important is tomorrow's news poll going to be?
Well, it's that's a bad poll for the government, just like every other poll has been this year. And look, I don't think we're going to see much difference in the poll by news poll tomorrow on what's happened in the last couple of weeks that has been good for the government. I'm struggling to think of what that is. So, and I've seen news polls today in New South Wales which show that the party's gone backwards there as well. So I would be girding my loins if I were the government in the expectation that there will be a bad news poll tomorrow.
Grahame, I'm sure you're not going to disagree with that.
No, it is really important, and I'll tell you why, and I don't understand the last couple of days why this hasn't been written. But for various reasons, I've needed to talk to some of the key players in the Labor Party in the last 72 hours. And when you listen to everyone, it seems to me that as of the weekend, Kevin Rudd had 50% of the caucus. Now, that means that Julia Gillard is Prime Minister at the gift of Kevin Rudd. She is Prime Minister at the pleasure of Kevin Rudd. And the difference is that the last opinion poll shifted a few of the marginal seat people, and the intervention of the AWU trade union leadership shifted a couple of votes who didn't like being told again what they should be doing by unelected union officials. Now, that is part of the story, that Kevin Rudd is roughly 50% of the caucus now. But the big one, the big part of the story, I think, is that he and his mates think that they probably need 75% of the vote to make it look good, to make it look right, to make it look clean, to be able to go to the Prime Minister and say, look, you're a dead duck. The problem is Bill Shorten. And Bill Shorten is pretty keen to be Treasurer in any new government, any new line-up. But remember, he's an opponent of Kevin Rudd. And you've got Chris Bowen, who is most likely to be Treasurer, or was most likely until the weekend to be Treasurer, and would actually do probably a better Treasurer than Bill Shorten, but Shorten would be a better communicator at what the government is doing Treasury-wise. Okay. So that poll tomorrow, if it were to shift a few more and make Bill Shorten uneasy, it really could be devastating for the Prime Minister.
Bruce, let me just get your reaction to this scoop from Grahame Morris on the numbers within the Labor caucus, now being 50% for Kevin Rudd. Is he right?
Well, what is that word that Grahame likes to use? Isn't it piffle? And I think, that's pretty much where all that is. There'll be people chatting and probably handing out misinformation to John Howard's former Chief of Staff, creating a bit of mischief. I don't think that there's any basis to what he's saying at the moment, and I'm not even sure that people are doing serious counting in the way that some people are talking about out there. I just don't see it happening, and I certainly don't see Bill Shorten becoming a treasurer in a Rudd government, and I don't actually see a Rudd government coming down the line either, because he's been ruling it out pretty aggressively in recent times.
All right, well, I'm sure we will be once again talking about Kevin Rudd and his prospects next week as well. We'll have to leave it there, though. Bruce Hawker, Grahame Morris, thank you for joining us today. After the break, we're going to look at the joint strike.